Mr. Chairman, if you're ready and everybody else is, we'll just go ahead and get started, and hopefully they can catch up with us on the audio portion of it.
Sorry, Greg.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chair, we have some recording of the audio. Is that right?
Well, we'll record it on our end here, so all the audio will be here when we record it.
Okay. I think this is fine to move forward. It's not like we get as many viewers as a city or county commission meeting does, but we have noticed this in multiple ways. So if it was supposed to be on Facebook, if it was supposed to be anyplace else, I would really appreciate a note being posted right now.
Sure. Okay.
We need to let everyone know what's going on, just in case some folks were watching. We've had a lot of struggles with the public participation. So
yes, ma'am, we have.
Okay. And do they think they're going to be able to get it back soon, or?
I'm hoping so. My understanding is they haven't had this problem before, so hopefully they can work through it sooner than later. But I know Tom is listening, so if we can, Tom, let's post something up that we're having audio issues. And we actually don't stream these on Facebook Live, just the TalGov site. Okay. So yeah, we can post that out there. Hopefully we can get that out, but we will have a complete recording of the meeting when all is said and done.
Got it.
Hey, Greg, just to kind of springboard off of what Commissioner Dozier was saying, can we get something from legal counsel right now, just kind of saying that it is permissible for us to have this meeting without a live stream and then without the public being present? I don't want to hold back the meeting, but I want to make sure that from a legal perspective that we are satisfying the law and conducting a meeting that the public can't view.
Commissioner Minor, these are all first impression issues, so I would err on the side of the commission going forward, or the board going forward with the meeting. Without any research, so I will qualify it, I would say that the board should go forward with the meeting, record the meeting, and then notice after the fact on the website from the CRTPA that we were intending to have a live stream meeting, but we could not do it because of audio difficulties, and that the meeting that was conducted can be located at whatever site it's going to be posted at. If there are any questions or concern, have a contact name, Greg, for them to reach out to about the meeting that was conducted.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Williams. Based on advice from legal counsel, it sounds like we're fine to proceed under the circumstances. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right, we ready?
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Randy Merritt. I'm the chair of the Capital Region Transportation Planning Agency. I'll call this meeting to order. It's Monday, September 21st, 2020 at 1:40 p.m. and we are broadcasting this meeting WCOT as well as online at www.talgov.com, qualifying that apparently at this point there are some audio problems. This meeting is being conducted virtually as authorized pursuant to the Governor's Executive Order number 20-69, which was most recently extended by Executive Order 20-179. Public comments desired to be made during the meeting may be submitted to the website at www.crtpa.org. Any comments that have been received by 5 p.m. Friday, September 18th, 2020, have been placed on this meeting's agenda webpage and provided to CRTPA members. Any comments received after that time will be accepted and included as part of the official record of this meeting. All right, let's move on to the roll call, please.
Commissioner Barfield.
Here.
Commissioner Allen. Commissioner Merritt.
Here.
Commissioner Villabisier. Okay, I see him here, so I'm going to mark him here.
Commissioner Villabisier,
Commissioner,
can you unmute your microphone? Okay, Yolanda, go ahead.
okay. Brian Deloge, Commissioner Deloge.
Yep, I'm here. Thank you.
All righty. Commissioner Dozier.
I'm here. Hi, Yolanda.
You. Hey. Commissioner Maddox. Commissioner Minor.
Here.
Commissioner Matlow.
I'm here.
Got a here?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Richardson
Here.
and Commissioner Williams Cox.
Here.
Alrighty, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any agenda modifications?
No, sir, not at this time.
Is there supposed to be a item to approve the agenda or no?
No, sir, we don't have those.
Okay, there's no public comments according to what I got earlier. On the consent, is there a motion to approve consent?
So move, Mr. Chairman.
Chair.
Second.
Yolanda, did you get that? Okay, all for the motion? Aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, Greg, item 6.
Mr. Chairman, first up, this will be a roll call vote. These are various amendments to our fiscal year 21-25 Transportation Improvement Program, or TIP. So I'm going to pass that off to Greg Burke. Greg, do you have any comments on this, or?
We have not received any comments on the TIP amendment, and I'm going to pass that over to Suzanne to give just a brief introduction.
I know we have a kind of a time constraint with some of our members. I'm assuming everybody has read these. Does anybody have any concerns with them?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to hear the introduction just in case staff has any highlights for us.
Okay. Suzanne?
Thank you very much. Yeah, the item here is presenting 5 transportation improvement program amendments to add a rail safety project in Jefferson County, 3 safety projects in Gadsden County for safe routes to school. They're going to upgrade to include lighting. And then the final is for the Eastern Federal Lands. There is an amendment to include a resurfacing project in Wakulla County. So I request by roll call vote approval of those 5 transportation improvement program tip amendments.
Okay, any questions or comments? Okay, is there a motion to approve it?
Moves recommendation option 1, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Meyer, second. All right, Yolanda?
Alrighty. Commissioner Barfield,
Yes.
okay. Commissioner Merritt,
Aye.
Commissioner BCA. We'll come back around to that one. Commissioner Deloge,
Yes.
Commissioner Dozier,
Yes.
Commissioner Maddox,
Yes.
Commissioner Minor,
Yes.
Commissioner Matlow,
Yes. Yes.
Commissioner Richardson,
Yes.
Commissioner Williams Cox,
Yes.
and Commissioner via BCA.
Okay, moving on.
Dr.
Item 7.
Mr. Chairman, hold on just a second. Dr. V, if you can hear me, try turning off your video, and let's see if you can just come through with audio, we might be able to at least hear you. And once Suzanne starts the presentation, I'll give you a call as well. Mr. Chairman, Suzanne's going to present to us our fiscal year 22 to 26 project priority lists. These are actually due to DOT in the next couple of weeks and outline the CRTPA's priorities for these various types of projects. So with that, Suzanne, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Greg. All right, and I'm just going to start this with going through the projects and the priority list, highlighting the changes, and then we'll come back to the agenda item, and then you can choose to either adopt them all at once, or we can adopt them separately or with changes to one, whatever you would like. So this year, our project priority list, you've already seen the transportation alternative projects that has been approved and sent to FDOT. These projects, the lists are for the regional mobility plan roadways, park and ped facilities, regional trails, transportation system management. And a new one this year is for the intelligent transportation systems, the ITS, aviation for the Tallahassee International Airport, and transit for Star Metro. Regional roadway project priorities have not changed since last year with the exception of priority number 6. This previously was operational improvements at the 5 Points intersection. With the completion of the Midtown plan, the improvements were identified from 7th Avenue to Monroe Street. So safety and pedestrian bicycle improvements as well as enhancements. So this has been modified to reflect those corridor improvements for this first segment. And this second segment is added as priority number 12, which is from Bradford Benton to 7th Avenue. So that would be the second segment of corridor improvements. The other change I would like to highlight is the Orange Avenue. There was funding program last year for the first segment for design from Spring Hill Road to Monroe Street. So that's funded in 2022 for design. So you'll see that we're asking for right-of-way funding for that segment. And then we're asking for design for the remaining segments from Capitol Circle to Spring Hill Road. So here is the map of the location of the project priorities. Here again is a quick summary of those changes. Are there any questions on those?
Suzanne,
I do.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, I do have a question on the Orange Avenue. With funding in 2022, I'm not understanding why the priority, why the rank is lower than those who seem to have funding in the out years.
These were the rankings. These have been the rankings for the past, I would say, at least 3 or 4 years. For consistency's sake, we have kept them that way. These projects above them, Woodville Highway and Capitol Circle, we anticipate, again, hopefully funding for Woodville Highway, and those projects will be completed. This is fully funded. Number 2, Crawfordville Road has been in this priority ranking. So again, they're all priorities, and FDOT has funding. For example, here's right-of-way. So we'll keep that segment there.
Okay, thank you. I guess my question is, if we have dedicated funding happening before we see some of the others, should we not look at the priority ranking with those that have funding and not those who were hoping to get funding or in later years?
Well, for example, Crawfordville Road, you don't see it here, but we're looking for right-of-way and construction. This design has already been funded. The PD&E and the design is done. You just didn't see that because it was in prior years.
Okay.
So there is funding on these projects here.
Okay, so for 1 and 2, priority 1 and 2, that too that's the case for them as well?
Yes, right now they are in the process of buying the right-of-way for Woodville Highway. And we're seeking construction. And then again, they have been funding the PD&E, and design has been completed for both of these segments. And we're looking to move those forward for right-of-way and construction.
Okay, I guess it was a question of mine. It might be a question of the public as well. Just looking at this without explanation, that it looks like because many of us are very interested in Orange Avenue moving on up the list in some form or fashion. And so when we look at this and we see where it is, and it has, you can see the dedicated funding, although we can't see the funding that has taken place on the other projects in the other years, and that's why they're there. It might be good to provide some type of explanation as to why those are ranking higher than Orange Avenue, other than this is the ranking order they've always been in.
I can put a footnote to those so that you would go down and see that actually that these have been funded for both design,
Okay,
PD&E have been completed, so that they understand why we're seeking to move those forward.
okay, thank you. I
Thank you.
think that'll be very helpful so others won't belabor the point like I'm doing.
Mr. Chairman,
It's a good
Yes.
question. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
I'm sorry.
it's Commissioner Richardson. I
Yes, sir.
want to thank our Mayor Pro Tem for that observation. But because I've been here longer, I knew that. And I want to bring notice to the fact that this Mayor Pro Tem has been a project that I have championed since I came to the commission. As you know, I live off of that segment of Orange Avenue, and I see the congestion every day. And I have championed this project, and it's been moving through the process. And I'm excited to see that in fiscal year 2022, we've got design money actually in the budget. My question is for Suzanne. When, because I've got some folk that have asked that own property along that segment, business property in particular, and they are interested in knowing when will the right-of-way property be purchased. Is that budgeted at this point?
Well, the PD&E is not officially completed. They haven't finalized that. They're anticipating completion, I believe, this year, and that's why they went and funded that.
Okay.
So until the PD&E is done and you have your recommended alternatives,
Right.
and then they get into design, they really won't know what those right-of-way impacts will be. But we will keep you posted and involve the public as we move forward.
Okay, thank you so much. I've had questions about that all along because there are people that want to know and want to know how their businesses are going to be impacted by the right-of-way acquisition.
Hey, Commissioner Richards, if I could follow up on that as well. As you can see, there's definitely nothing programmed by 2025. We're probably still several years out before we get into actual right-of-way acquisition, probably as many as 5 to 8 to 10 years, just depending on how funding becomes available.
Okay, thank you so much. That's informative. I'll be able to let those individuals know. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Suzanne, I'm assuming the other parts of Crawford Highway aren't showing up because they're already in the DOT's plan.
The you mean the other phases for the PD&E and the
Well, the ones, I mean, the design's already done on downtown Crawfordville.
correct. That's why we're not seeing them, and that went to Commissioner Cox's comment. So Commissioner William Cox's comment regarding making a notation that extension has already been applied to this project for the phases, and I will note these are PD&E and design.
Okay.
All right, moving along. So with the addition of the number 12
Suzanne?
priority,
Mr.
move
Chair?
the 13,
Yes.
14, and 15 down.
Suzanne, hold on.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Do we have a question?
Yes, this is first, I ask this every meeting. We're using the raise your hand functions or not? Because I'll just jump right in if not. If
No,
I
just jump in.
I'll wait my
I
turn.
can't see everybody's picture anyway, so
Sorry?
I can't see everybody's picture on the screen because of the presentation, so just go ahead.
So I have used the raise your hand function and that seems to work well, but we seem to make up different rules every time we come into a meeting. So just asking, because I didn't mean to interrupt you there, Suzanne. So if we're going to take these in chunks, Mr. Chair, then I had a couple questions on Orange Avenue as well. I appreciate the discussion already. And then we can move on to the next sections.
Yeah, let's go ahead.
Question on Thomasville. Is that
Do
good?
it in chunks. Go ahead, Christine.
Okay, thank you. So Greg, you and I also had a conversation about Orange Avenue and briefing, so I appreciate the questions that have already been asked. But one of the things that I guess stands out to me always, and I just want to recognize this, is these projects are in the pipeline for, could be up to 20 years with our long range plan. And any way that we can explain this long process better, as Commissioner Williams Cox mentioned, could be very helpful, but we always run into this challenge. And I think the way y'all have presented it is, let's say, far better than we used to. So I think we're getting there. I understand the concern, but in the draft, in this ranking, it's also kind of all working together, right? Whatever's in our 5-year plan, whatever's the top of the list, they're all working kind of the same time. They've just got different status. Is that correct?
Yes.
Correct, they're in different phases, yes.
And I think probably what we could do in the future, though, we always try to make the priority list as concise as we can. We could probably include sort of an appendix that gives you a bit of history on each of these projects. And, as we're talking about the timeline, and I'll remind you all, the Woodville Highway, our number one priority, actually got into, I'll do air quotes, the process in 2010 or 2012. We're still seeking construction on that. And right now it's at least 5 years out, if not more. So just that number one priority alone has taken will have taken probably 16 to 18 years from the time it started with the planning through to the construction. And unfortunately, that's just the way these things are these days. A lot of it is the tremendous cost of each of these projects. But Commissioner Judge, you're correct. They just all have to work their way through the process and, and kind of take their next step when that funding becomes available.
Okay. I like the idea of an appendix. That sounds very similar to what we are looking at with Blueprint. We asked them to try to capture the history of a project. They're developing those websites per project. Would not need to be the same level of detail for CRTPA roads, but I think the appendix could help remind us all how long we've been looking at this list. So related to that, one of the other things you and I talked about, and probably for my colleagues, this is something that's going to be on my mind at every transportation meeting, every time we discuss it, city, county blueprints, CRTPA, Suncoast, whatever it might be. We are facing and Greg, you and I ran through this short list, so I've got it in my notes. Recession, we don't know where the state budget's going to be. So FDOT Central is already anticipating some challenges in transportation funding. This is on top of already having problems with transportation funding for a very long time, maybe a decade or more. And then we've got the MCORs, the toll roads that are in FDOT's budget. Whatever happens with that could further reduce funding in the out years. And then we also had a note in our blueprint document last week that I mentioned to you that we're not anticipating blueprint fundings for the add-ons, for stormwater, for multimodal, for all of that. So I wanted to bring that into this conversation because Orange particularly is on my mind. It does intersect with some blueprint projects, even though this has been shifted from blueprint funding to CRT, or a joint funding approach perhaps, to a CRTPA approach. So because of that shift, because we're waiting for state dollars exclusively to improve Orange Avenue, and because of those budget challenges, we could hope for construction dollars by 2025, but we won't really know that. Did I sum that up correctly?
Yes, ma'am. Just want to clarify for Orange Avenue, we still have to go through a right-of-way phase that's not funded either. So construction, again, is probably at least 10 to 12 years out. And again, that's just an educated guess at this point. But yeah, we've still got to go through, when I look at these right-of-way costs on Crawfordville Road, I've got to think the right-of-way on Orange Avenue is going to be probably in the order of 30 to 50 million plus, because you're dealing with a lot, but practically entirely commercial properties through there by and large. So that's going to be an incredibly expensive right-of-way phase for Orange Avenue, especially one from Spring Hill back to Wanish Way or Monroe.
Yeah,
Um,
Chairman, I think it's pretty much all commercial. Like, you're absolutely correct.
well,
Sorry.
no, that's fine. Commissioner Richardson, the reason why I wanted to jump in here is you have been the champion of this
Yeah.
project, but I hope you know from your colleagues and all of our
Oh,
conversations
yes.
over the years, we all understand the need. In fact, when we saw those safe routes to schools, and there was a hawk walk, there was some safety improvements by NIMS middle, and that stood out to me immediately because we need that now.
Yes.
We're waiting on road improvements, right?
Right.
So the reason why I wanted to bring this into our conversation here is I think it's in our interest for all four counties, particularly Leon and Tallahassee, though, to keep in mind that the choices we make at Blueprints, and I'm not necessarily questioning those choices. We had a lot of funding, so we put it on, and we assumed that Orange Avenue was in line for state funding. That is different than how we thought about this project years ago when it was mixed funding, and it may make it even more challenging now. So the last thing I was going to say on this piece was any interim steps that we could take, like that safe routes to schools or other things. I think we need to focus on that. If 12 years is as soon as we could get construction, it could be longer. So, and I think we need to be honest with the community about that. These are factors out of our control.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Chair, that was a lot packed in for Orange Avenue, but the budget issues are just front and center on my mind, like I said. For Thomasville Road, my only question there, and Greg, it would probably really help the county folks if we saw, I think I've seen some drafts of the Midtown plan, but that was something developed by the city. And I want to make sure I'm up to date on where we stand with this, because there are pieces moving through the city and moving through different bodies. So, and I'm getting a lot of feedback. I'm sorry. I don't know.
Somebody's on their keyboard again, it sounds like.
Okay. Just want to make sure. So we've got the Thomasville Road, 7th to Monroe Street. We've got project number 12, but all of this is skipping over the intersection. It doesn't include the Thomasville Road alignment. Those are still separate.
Yes, ma'am. Now, for clarification, when on number, I believe it's number 7, number 12, or 6 and number 12, when it says Midtown Plan, that refers to the Midtown Area Transportation Plan that we've been conducting, and actually we'll be presenting that to you next month. We've been coordinating with the city on the work they've been doing with the Midtown, I believe it's called Working Group, but I don't recall that there's a lot of necessarily transportation improvements in that, but this is focusing on the work that we've done as part of the Midtown Area Transportation Plan. Again, that we'll presenting to you next month, the final version of that.
That answers my question. There's so many plans and visions and everything else. I was just getting mixed. I want to make sure I got the right one in mind. Okay, that's it. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Greg.
You're welcome. Any other questions on the roadway?
Mr. Chair, not a question.
Sorry.
Not a question, but to put out there, it was good to know that these projects initiated also so very long ago that it might not be a bad idea. I can live without it, but again, for clarification for those who come along behind us and see this chart, it might not be a bad idea to have a project initiation year somewhere in here so that folks will be able to see that, okay, this is priority rank number 1, but it's been out there since 1908. So that would explain to some folks why it is where it is, because it is. I understand it is a long process, and we've run into that when we deal with trying to get information from residents who were not around when the project began. But here we are, 10, 20 years later, new people are involved in these communities now. So just a suggestion. You don't have to take it, but I just thought that would be good to show how long it takes to get through this process.
Thank you. Okay, Suzanne, the bicycle.
Thank you very much. All right. So bicycle and pedestrian priorities. There are some changes here with this list. So quickly, I'll just touch on those. The
Mr.
Thomasville
Chairman,
Road multi-use path had
Chairman?
previously been listed as.
Yes, sir.
Suzanne, hold on.
Can I ask a question? Since if we go through all of these, I don't think I'm going to be here for all of them, but I would like to vote on those that I can. Can we take each item one at a time to vote on rather than doing it in one fell swoop?
I don't see any problem with that. So let's go back to the roadway. I was thinking about it myself.
I move staff recommendation on option number 1.
This
Mr.
is on
Chairman?
this is agenda 7A1, correct, Curtis?
Yes, yes.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, is there any opposed? All right, we'll consider that one passed then. All right, Suzanne, go ahead.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Curtis.
Okay.
Did you want to say something?
Oh, no, I'm good. Go ahead.
Okay. All right, so with the bicycle and pedestrian projects, there are some changes to this list, and just to quickly touch on those. The bicycle pedestrian master plan that was just recently completed for Leon County identified the Thomasville Road multi-use path as the #1 priority. And that would connect Bradford Benton up to Live Oak Plantation, trying to get people from the Midtown to the Market District. The project priority #4 and #5 have been added, and those two were identified in the bicycle pedestrian plan as well as in the greenways and master plans for the city of Tallahassee and Leon County. Project removed was the Florida Arts Trail in Gadsden County and the Wakulla Environmental Institute Florida Arts Trail in Gadsden and Wakulla, yes, in the Wakulla County. Those two, both of the studies identified options, but they're not moving forward at this time. So they're being taken off the list. And the Bloxham Cutoff and the US 90 multi-use path from Midway to Quincy shifted down just one in rank. So here is the list, if anybody has any questions. Hearing none, we request approval of option 1.
Okay, is there a motion to approve? I'm still with
Second.
that. Who made the motion?
All of us.
I did.
It was
All right, well, so we'll give it to Betsy in a second. Commissioner Minor, I saw you raise your hand.
Thank you.
Any opposed? Okay, Suzanne, next item.
Yeah. Regional trails. So with the, pardon me, with the regional trails, again, the #1 priority, which is funded for construction in 2024, so it will remain on the list, is the coastal trail from St. Mark's to Lighthouse. Previously, priority #2 had been the Nature Coast Trail, and it actually read from it was from Jefferson County from Monticello to Tallahassee. We've broken that out so that you've got the west connector in Leon County and then the east in Jefferson County. So both of those, the feasibility study is underway currently by the CRTPA. And with the addition of breaking those into two, that pushes the Capitol Cascades Trail down to #4. And then the Forest Trail South is removed, and that reduced the total number of projects on the list to #6, or to a total of 6. So with that, we're requesting approval of option 1, please.
Any questions?
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, any opposition?
quick question, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Thank you. This is one area that it seems like we're making a lot of progress. We got money coming in. Greg, we've talked a lot, and when I met with you and others, and I think Kimley Horn talking about the Highway 90 to Jefferson County. So again, a birthday gift to our dear Jefferson County Commissioner. Just keep saying it. There's a lot of overlap with the Sun Trails Network, and I know we dug into this when we were looking at the capital city to see. It seems like sometime in the next year, and I'm fine waiting until the spring or sometime, but we may want to wrap our mind around where we stand with the Trails Network. It seems like there's some funding benefits, potential other funding that we could receive. That's what I mean, to get this connectivity done. And it's really exciting, but we've made a lot of progress. And I guess I'm saying I'd like to see the big picture and how that connects to our trail network in Leon, Tallahassee. Am I on the right track with that, or?
Yes, ma'am, that'd be fine. And yeah, the Nature Coast connector is part of the Sun Trail system. We actually received word late last week that they're opening up a Sun Trails cycle this year. I don't know that we're going to be able to get this finished in time to put into that cycle. If not, definitely next year. But I think these would be very good projects to target for the Sun Trails funding.
So I'm glad I asked the question there. So when you say getting it done, you don't know if you'll have it done in time. It's because we're at a feasibility study and this money is for construction, or?
Typically, they could be for PD&E's design or construction. We're just not sure, to be honest with you. I have not had a chance to look to see if there's any new requirements. We're just not sure that we're in a position at this point to put in a good application. I know we definitely would be next year, but this year I'm not quite certain because we don't really have the public involvement done on this yet. I would hate to start that process and run into an issue in the public involvement. I will mention the fact that we did a presentation to the Jefferson County Commission last Thursday night, and the project was well received by the commission. And we're scheduling meetings with the city of Monticello here in the next few weeks as well. So we may take a stab at it this year, but we may want to wait and be able to do a better application next year.
That is understood. I certainly don't want to get anything in the way of Nature Coast. I mean, advancing a project ahead of it. But anything we can do to take advantage of these opportunities would be great. So,
and keep in mind,
I know timing is timing. Yeah.
Well, and our understanding too from DOT central office is pretty much everything in the Sun Trails bucket, if you want to call it, is allocated out through 2025. So there's, we may pick up a little bit here and there, but by and large, the funding levels that we're looking at for these, they're gonna have to come out of an entire allocation of Sun Trails funding, not maybe bits and pieces that are left over here and there, because both of these are going to be fairly expensive projects to undertake.
Okay, well, I'll just circle back, Mr. Chair. Again, I think this is the very reason I'd like to see a bigger picture, maybe in the spring, just to make sure we're doing everything we can. We've given as much direction as we can to take advantage of these opportunities, and that is no criticism. Y'all are moving fast. I'm glad the Jefferson County meeting went well. This is just critically important to all 4 counties and want to keep it on the forefront. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, there's a motion and a second on the floor. Is there any opposition to it? All right, we'll count that one as passed. Suzanne?
Okay. So the next projects are the transportation system management, and these are usually smaller projects that can be completed within a couple of years. So the only change is there's no change to this list, either in ranking or in projects, with the exception of there were 3 projects, 6, 7, and 8, that have been removed because they're not feasible, either due to the cost of the project, it's not a TSN project, or after studying it, FDOT determined that, particularly for the 2 roundabouts, that these would not be feasible to move forward at this time as well. So with that, I'm requesting a recommendation on option 1, approval of option 1, please. Any questions?
I would make that motion, and I have a question for Suzanne.
Okay, we got a motion by Curtis. Is there a second?
Yeah, second, this is Brian.
Thank you, Mr.
Brian
Chairman.
Deloge, second. Go ahead, Curtis.
So Suzanne, again, there are two items, numbers 3 and 5, that I have championed because they are pedestrian safety issues on Orange Avenue, where we have kids who are crossing Orange Avenue to get to NIMS. They're not going down to the traffic light. And there's also a bus stop on the south side of Orange Avenue, right there at NIMS, and people are crossing to get to that bus stops. And then also the crosswalk, same situation in Liberty Park, where the Star Metro bus facility and the convenience store gas station are on the north side of Orange Avenue. The Liberty Park neighborhood is on the south side. And I pray every day that nothing happens along that segment. So my question is, Suzanne, I know that later on in the agenda under the urban attributable funding, there is funding for improvements for those two crosswalks. How does that figure into what we're doing with this item?
Well, that funding became available to us in current year. So basically, we went to our priority list to inform us. And FDOT indicated that they would not be able to complete priority number 2, that it did not meet their criteria for the
Okay.
safety improvements. So we identified that as projects that we could fund. I'm sorry, number 3, is that we could fund with that urban attributable funding this year. So we would move those into design and construction.
Okay, Mr. Chairman.
Yes,
so
sir.
Is the 274,000 and change for Liberty Park and the 75,000 for NIMS, is that total funding for those projects to be completed?
I don't
Yes, sir.
don't
Yes,
know
sir.
for sure.
That's that, Mr. Richard. That's our preliminary estimate at this point.
Okay, that's what I needed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. All right, any more questions? All right, we have a motion and a second on the floor. Any opposed? We'll count that as passed too. Suzanne?
This is a new list this year. The Tallahassee Advanced Transportation Management System, TATMS, they have just completed the update to their Intelligent Transportation System Plan, the ITS Master Plan. We partnered with them on this project, and as a result, there were a number of projects that were listed in priority order. These were the top projects that needed significant funding, and we have now added them to a separate list, the ITS list. And again, this is the first time this has been introduced to you, and we're requesting approval of option 1. Do you have any questions?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I will move option 1, and I've got a question.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Second that.
Curtis? Okay, go ahead. Kristen?
Thank you. I'm sure we've all immensely enjoyed a tour of the CDA and seeing the phenomenal traffic control engineering center. Since this is a new category, again, I'm thinking next spring or later, we don't need to add anything else right now. I would like to understand better what trailblazers and other things, I've got a little bit on that, but just if we're going to be funding this category, which I think we probably should, to my knowledge, we haven't had a presentation on really what all of this means. And it just might be nice to have a short update on the types of things that could come up. And I mean, there's some high dollars that are being requested. I assume this is a different pot of money than others, and it's not going to impact any of our other projects. The state's very interested in funding these intelligent systems, but I'd just like to understand it as a board, and I'm sure the public would like to understand it a little bit better. Is that acceptable, Greg?
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Chairman, if I could, typically this is not the way we would do something like this. We would have presented the ITS master plan before we requested this. But in this case, it was just an issue of timing. The plan was finished up by and large, I think, in late June, early July. That's around the time we learned that we had the SU funds available. So we felt we'd go ahead and put this together because we had some funding to cover at least part of what we're ranking as priority number one. But our plan had been to probably do a presentation to you at the retreat, just to give you that very background that you're looking for. And yes, ma'am, at some point sooner than later, we would come in and do a presentation on the master plan. As I said, we typically don't do this. It was more just an issue of timing.
Thank you, Greg. And let me say, I'm all for y'all moving forward. If you have identified money, we need to get it out into critical projects. This is unusual, but just for the record, it was the right move. I support the move. It's just coming back and doing that update later.
Sure.
I'm thrilled to know you already had that on your list. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments? We have a motion and a second on the floor. Any opposed? All right, Suzanne?
All right, thank you. Commissioner Dozier, I had to ask what a trailblazer was too. Okay, moving on to the transit project priority list. This list is provided to us by Star Metro. It is, these are projects identified in their transit development plan. So their number one priority, we're seeking construction money. It's under design right now for the South City Transit Center. And so the projects, the rankings have changed. The South City Transit Center moved from 4th to the 1st place. And again, it's got funding current year for design. And then the redevelopment at the CK Steel, that planning study moved from the 5th to the 2nd place. And a project was deleted because I think they have completed these activities, which is some bus stop upgrades. Therefore, there's only 4 priority projects remaining on this list. Any questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I'd move staff recommendation on option number 1, and then I have a brief comment.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Diane, go ahead, Curtis.
I'll be brief. This is another one that I am so excited about because this is the Star Metro Transit Center at the intersection of Orange and South Meridian. Again, this was a project that I championed as a member of the Sales Tax Committee. So that the design money actually is coming out of Blueprint. And that's part of our overall plan for redevelopment and revitalization of the South City neighborhood. I was just at the Orange Avenue Apartments yesterday with the Tallahassee Housing Authority Director, and she was giving an update on the redevelopment of the Orange Avenue Apartments. We've got some improvements for green space in that area. We're going to be closing in the drainage ditch that runs from South Monroe to Orange Avenue and making that a green space area with park amenities. And so this is just a part of what we're doing to revitalize and redevelop the South City neighborhood. And I'm excited to see that we're moving forward with it because this, again, is going to be one of those transformational projects for South City. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
And Mr. Chairman, if I could, I just wanted to clarify something Commissioner Richardson. Actually, the CRTPA provided the design funding for the transit center itself.
All right, but it is a Blueprint project, right?
I think there is some Blueprint money in it.
Yeah.
But, again, I just want to clarify, you all voted to approve design funding for that project, I believe last year or the year before.
Okay. All right. I just thought the early money was the Blueprint money, but Dan corrected. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments? Motion second is on the floor. Any opposed? Okay, Suzanne?
Okay, moving down, the last is the Tallahassee International Airport. They have been requested by FDOT to provide their projects by year. And as you can see, a lot of these are just reflecting on, particularly in the first 3, well, actually the first 4 years, it's just reflecting the money that's already been committed in the state work program and in the city's budget to improvements at the airport. And we're recommending approval of option 1.
So move.
Second,
Second?
second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Any opposed? Okay, thank you.
All right, that concludes my presentation on the priorities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Suzanne. Greg, it's all you.
All right. Mr. Chairman, next up, item 7B is our SU funding approval. And give me just a second to get this screen up here. Hopefully everybody can see it. Everybody see that okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. As has been mentioned or referenced a couple of times prior, as I mentioned at our last meeting, we've been informed by DOT that we had about tick over $2 million in what are called urban attributable funds. For whatever reason, they're coded SU, but those are funds that you all as the board get to direct where those monies are spent. So we sat down and we put together, in essence, a budget here based on, as Suzanne mentioned earlier, the priorities that you all just approved. Project number one is the camera upgrade for the Tatum's ITS master plan. Item number two is the Thomasville Road trail design. This is a potential partnership with Blueprint. We've reached out to them to see if they may have anything available. We've proposed allocating $450,000 for this project. That would get us roughly about half of that project from Midtown up to Market Square, the design on that done. The next project is the US 90 sidewalks in Quincy. This was our number one priority on our transportation alternatives priorities that you adopted back in June, I believe, or July. The next one is Gadsden Street sidewalk. This is actually not on a priority list, but this follows up with funding that you all approved a year or two ago on the design of this project. The project itself came out of our Midtown Area Transportation Plan Phase 1. That was a link over off of Gadsden Street there around Brass Tap. It's about a 300-foot sidewalk in that area. The next two, actually, really, we could combine them, as we mentioned earlier. These are the safety improvements at both Liberty Park and NIMS Middle School. We don't have detail yet as to exactly what will be done. DOT is actually going to do some work for us to determine how best to approach these projects, but hopefully we could get them done over the next probably 18 months. Hopefully not that, hopefully a bit quicker than that, but these would be design build if we could manage that. But this is what we're looking at, or our proposal to you all to allocate that fiscal year 21 funding.
Okay, is there a motion on this item?
So move, Mr. Chairman, for option number one.
Second,
Okay, we have a second, Diane. All right, discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
Greg, again, I pray every day that I go along this segment that nothing happens to our neighbors trying to cross Orange Avenue at Liberty Park, and especially our young people they're in front of NIMS Middle School. I mean, it's a recipe for disaster. So anything that we can do to expedite this work, please, let's do that.
Yes, sir. That's what we're working on now.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Any other discussion? Any opposition? All right, we'll consider that one pass. Next item.
Item 7C is our fiscal year 21 CRTPA budget, Mr. Chairman, and Ms. Lex will be covering that for us.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Before Suzanne starts, I'm going to have to leave. I've got to take my daughter.
Yes, sir.
So I just wanted to let you know that.
See you next meeting, Curtis.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Richardson.
Thank
Chris,
you.
we don't say it enough. I'm sorry for getting informal. You're a good dad. He's doing stuff with your girls. Thank you, Commissioner Richardson.
Dozier. Take care.
See you.
All right. So with that, again, they carried the negative over. here that should not have been a negative in either of these columns, even though the numbers are correct. So I'd like to bring that to your attention.
Thank
And
you, Commissioner
overall,
Minor.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Suzanne, sorry.
No worries. Okay. Overall, the increase from last year's budget to this year's budget is $40,000. And the biggest increase was in healthcare costs with the addition of me to the healthcare plan. Previously, the employee before me did not carry health insurance through the city. So that's where you see the biggest increase in cost. And we've made some adjustments again in thinking that we may need some additional software if we continue with our virtual world, and we'll have some computer upgrades that are necessary this year as well. And with that, if there's any questions, and I'm seeking approval of option number 1.
Are there any questions about the budget? Okay, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
All right, Kristen motion, Diane second. Any more discussion? Anyone opposed? Excellent. On to the cost feasible plan.
All right, thank you.
Chairman,
Thank you, Suzanne.
today this is the draft, first draft of our cost feasible plan. And before I pass it off to Jack to start the presentation, I just want to remind everyone, and this is always my word of caution when we get to this point in the long range plan. We have to put together, per federal law, we have to show a plan that's balanced based on the anticipated revenues that we have. However, most any of us that ever worked in this long enough, when you do a financial projection, they're pretty much shot the day you do them or the day after or whatever. So I would encourage you just to focus more so on the projects themselves, not necessarily worry about the timing or the amounts that are there. The important thing is that the projects are actually identified in the long range plan. That's what allows them to move forward through the development until their final construction or whatever that might be. And Greg, if we can mute everybody, because we're getting some feedback somewhere. I'll unmute myself. So I'm going to turn it over to Jack to start off with the presentation. Thanks, Jack.
Thanks, Greg. So I wanted to first say there's some very good observations about the priority project lists, and particularly to the roadway component that we have in there. Those same kind of considerations that go into that also were considered in what we were about to present to you. Keeping in mind that when we do finally approve this cost feasible plan component, next year you'll see these projects show up again in the priority project list based on this long range plan. So on the 2045. Last month, we presented a bunch of items to you all regarding things like needs plan, project costs, priority criteria, and so forth. And we said that we would bring back you some project rankings and for the cost feasible plan. And what we took a look at also was additional information to help kind of clarify how we got to the point that we have presented inside of the agenda item for the cost feasible plan. So as we move forward, there's still a bunch of information that we are providing you and for consideration as part of this process. And with that, I will turn it over to Allison and Kate. I think I see her on there somewhere. Allison and Kate from Kimley Horn.
All right, thanks, Jack. Hear me okay?
Can hear you great.
All right, wonderful. Well, yes, thank you for the TF, Greg and Jack. And I think what we will do now is I have a presentation that essentially just takes us through the agenda items and provides a little bit more context on those. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen here. And hopefully technology will be my friend. All right, can everyone see my presentation?
You got it.
Fantastic. All right, great. So as Jack said, today is really just taking things one step further. We met with y'all last time and kind of led up to every prior step that brings us to the development of the cost feasible plan, but didn't take that final step of actually getting into the cost feasible plan itself. So since that time, we were able to take your comments. We've met with the committees, and had a chance to kind of put everything together into the cost feasible plan. So we want to just tee that up for you today and give you a little bit of the review of how we got to where we got, and then discuss the cost feasible plan itself, and hopefully take some time to answer any questions that you have. So just a little bit of background on this. As we talked last month and in some of the previous board meetings, we've started with things like the discussion of our needs plan, which is essentially our recommendations. We talk about those for all of our different travel modes. And then we move into things like a discussion of our project prioritization. Last month, we talked about that, particularly on the roadway side, because we know that for our roadway projects, we have to get all the way out to the development of this cost feasible plan. For things like bicycle and pedestrian projects that are independent projects, or transit projects, aviation projects, we don't actually have to take those all the way to this end goal of the cost feasible plan. But we do here for roadway. And so we want to make sure that we have a process that takes us all the way through prioritization to understanding what those revenue levels are really going to be, and then a good understanding of our project costs. So to understand our starting point, we have to think about some of the things that are already ongoing. And this is really taking us back to our existing plus committed projects. So you already talked about some of these today when we went through the priority project list, but essentially these are projects that have funding that is already obligated. These projects are going to be complete by, like, let's say the 2025 timeframe, which is the conclusion of your TIP, your Transportation Improvement Program, which is your short range planning document. So these are projects that we don't have to take through prioritization. We don't have to take through the development of our cost feasible plan, because they're essentially going to be done before we get into those next steps for the RMP. But we want to make sure that they're being shown and that they're being accounted for, because they are essentially the very first steps of what ultimately becomes our regional mobility plan. We then have to think about our year of expenditure revenues. And that year of expenditure notation is important. Everything that we're going to be showing you basically from here on out is shown in future year dollars. So inflation is being taken into account. We'll talk about that here in just a second. And you'll see that sometimes things look like they're increasing on out into the future. That's not necessarily the case when you actually think about how inflation comes into play, or it may have a diminished effect. And in some cases, we may actually have a diminished spending power when we see revenue levels that are staying constant over future years, or revenue levels that are decreasing. So when we're talking about roadways, because again, this is what we need to take all the way through to that cost feasible plan development, we're really talking about three major revenue sources: the strategic intermodal system, our other arterials or OA funds, that's essentially our other state and federal funding levels coming from FDOT. The majority of our projects that we're getting state and federally funded are coming through OA funds, because for SIS projects, the strategic intermodal system, those are only projects that are on the SIS network, which is a very small component of projects here in the CRTPA area, primarily consisting around interstates and other major roadways such as that. And then the final source that we're really taking into close consideration here is our blueprint and local funding, specific to the roadway sources. And this is something that has really had a chance to evolve and become much better refined since the last time that we had a conversation with this group, and even with our committees. We've had a chance to sit down with the folks at Blueprint and understand more about what they're doing with their revenues, what those revenue levels are looking like as of now, and how they're anticipating to allocate those monies out into the future. So what you see here in terms of the revenues and then later on in the cost feasible plan really do reflect our best understanding and Blueprint's best understanding of how they intend to move forward in the next few years. So there's a few things that we want to just kind of walk you all through to make sure that everybody's on the same page before we get to the cost feasible plan itself. Thinking about the timeframes and how we're structuring our project tiers, talk a little bit more about prioritization and specifically the role of the priority project list, inflation factors, funding set-asides. That's a conversation that is a little bit new for this plan. And then also project phasing and multimodal accommodations. So first off, you actually saw a little preview of this earlier in my revenue table, but just want to make sure that everybody is conversant in our time periods that we're going to be talking about basically from here on out in our cost feasible plan. So we have 4 tiers for this funding. Tier 1 is essentially our nearest term tier. This is our TIP tier is what I would like to call it because it does match with the years of your TIP. This is kind of our next 4-year period. Tier 2 is the next 5 years out beyond that, 2026 to 2030. Tier 3 is another 5-year period of 2031 to 2035. And then Tier 4 is a 10-year period of 2036 through 2045. So that's actually a federal suggestion now for these plans that the last tier be a bit longer because we are less certain about being able to put those projects into the exact, more specific time periods and buckets out that far. So it gives us just a little bit more latitude in planning out in that furthest tier. One of the things that I think is helpful to point out in terms of project prioritization is we just had a great discussion with this group about the priority project list. And as was pointed out in the discussion, that priority project list includes projects and really is an artifact of discussions that have been a product of many years in the making. And so that's an area where we want to almost use that as our first starting point when we develop our cost feasible plan. Now, this regional mobility plan has its own project prioritization, which is a quantitatively and qualitatively based tool that we've gone over with you in the past couple of meetings that helps us understand what of our needs projects actually need to go in and how they're scoring relative to one another. But we start first with that priority project list. And I think you'll see this as you go into the cost feasible plan, is that we want to start with that PPL, which has a fair number of projects on it. And as you'll see, within our cost feasible plan itself, in fact, all of the projects that end up being financially constrained are contained within the priority project list. So that's just something I wanted to point out now, and we'll note it again when we get to the spreadsheet itself. Just briefly talking about inflation factors, this is just for your reference. This is actually an attachment in your board packet today. But we are using inflation factors that are provided to us from FDOT from their revenue forecasting guidebook. And so that's a very helpful tool to help us understand what those inflation factors should be. Now, one thing that we are doing is since we use cost bands, we don't have to necessarily look at these for every single year. So we're really looking at the midpoint year for each one of our cost bands. So you can see that they actually normalize out to 3.3%. So that's something that for our later years, pretty much our inflation factors are being considered at that 3.3% level on out into the plan. I did want to talk about funding set-aside. Funding set-aside is something that was actually a new consideration in part for this plan. Now, as Greg Slay, I believe it was mentioned earlier on in this meeting, you all have had the benefit of the preparation of a new intelligent transportation master plan for the area. And so this is a really great tool that's going to enable you all to actually identify some specific projects to help advance ITS concepts and having a more integrated network on into the future. And so we were able to draw off of the recommendations contained within that plan and start to understand what might be needed in terms of funding to move those projects forward. Similarly, we have a list of intersections that was identified as part of our existing conditions development. We went through and looked at the safety issues in the area and said, you know, where are some of the big safety problems from a safety and operational standpoint, and identified some of those intersections. Rather than listing each individual project within our cost feasible plan, we instead are creating these set-asides, which essentially dedicates a portion of our revenue stream, and in this case, it's our other arterials revenue stream. So this is our state and federal funding buckets, and we are taking a percentage of each of those each year and saying that it will go to these types of projects. So what that does is it gives you additional flexibility. Rather than having to say, oh, well, we were thinking about this one intersection, but now there's been a multi-car fatality or a multi-person fatality at this other intersection, we really need to move it ahead. You have the ability to do that by utilizing this set aside and just knowing that those funds are there and available for that purpose. Thinking about that one step further, we don't just have set-asides that are available only within the roadway sphere. One of the great comments that was actually made as a part of our CMAC meeting was to better represent the impact and the contribution of bicycle and pedestrian projects and bicycle and pedestrian funding as a part of the cost feasible plan. And we want to make sure we really internalize that comment and represent it to you all here as well. And one of the ways that we see bicycle and pedestrian projects being recognized here is through a set aside for those types of projects. Now, the projects that you would typically have coming out of this set aside here are independent bicycle and pedestrian projects. So those are projects that are not tethered to a roadway project or some other type of project, but standalone projects such as the ones that were introduced within the PPL earlier in this meeting. Typically, those projects have been funded here in CRTPA by using your TMA, which is your Transportation Management Area, direct allocation funds. And then also here locally by looking at some of the blueprint funding levels that have been allocated to bicycle and pedestrian projects. So we did want to note that those funds have historically been utilized for those types of independent bicycle and pedestrian projects. We also want to talk about project phasing. This is something that you're going to see as we get into the cost feasible plan. We actually break each one of our projects, our roadway projects, into multiple phases so that you can see how they are progressing throughout the various different cost bands, throughout the different tiers. So things like PD&E, which is project development and environment, functional design, right-of-way acquisition, and project construction. Now, not all of the projects will show all four of these phases. I think that's important to note for various reasons. First, some of them may have had prior phases already completed, so we only want to show those phases that remain. Second, there may be some of these projects that do not require all four phases. For instance, we identified a couple of projects along the way that are not anticipated to require any right-of-way acquisition due to the nature of the project. And as such, they would not have that as a project phase. So as you go through and see the list, if you see a project phase missing, it's likely for one of those two reasons. And then finally, the final attribute I wanted to point out before we actually get to the table itself is multimodal accommodation. Because one of the things that is important to consider here, and again, this was brought up to us by the folks in the CMAC, I think very well, is pointing out that these roadway capital projects that we're talking about do go beyond just the provision of thinking about capacity or operational improvement. In fact, all of the projects in the cost feasible plans as well as in the unfunded needs have been considered for the provision of multimodal accommodations. So when you start to take a look at the projects within the cost feasible plan of those that are not a part of the interstate for obvious reasons, actually all of them include bicycle and pedestrian or bicycle or pedestrian accommodations. And then we also looked at those that are located currently along transit routes. And we have 62% of our projects that are currently located along transit routes. So that's just something to point out. It's a very important part of these projects, and it's important to consider them kind of as a single unit as we communicate those projects. One other thing about that is as we move into talking about these with the public and into our report documentation is we will be putting together some project sheets for our cost feasible projects that actually detail out all of the recommendations of these different projects so that you can really see both the roadway improvements as well as the multimodal improvements that are a part of each one of these recommendations. So I'm going to pause there. That was all of the background before we actually get to the main event and talk about the tables that were included in your packet. Are there any questions at this point?
Greg, you want to unmute everybody, see if you might get a question?
I think everybody is eager to get to the next thing. So we'll press forward here. And feel free to interject if you do have a question. So this is attachment 1 that was included within your board packet, which is our cost feasible plan. I want to just provide a little bit of orientation to this table. I'm sure that you all have already spent some time familiarizing yourselves with it. But just to give you a little bit of a connection back to some of the slides that we were just pointing out. So the first 9 rows that you see in here represent those funding set-asides that we talked about. So we have our ITS projects, our Intelligent Transportation Systems projects, our intersection improvements, and then our bicycle and pedestrian independent projects. So those are shown as near-term, mid-term, and long-term. Now, to be clear, we are showing our Tier 2, Tier 3, and Tier 4 projects only, and those bands only in here. So we're not showing Tier 1. So Tier 1 essentially was that existing plus committed list that I showed you earlier on. And it's those projects that already have that funding obligated and that are going to be finalized during that time period. So we're looking at 2026 on through 2045 within this spreadsheet right now. But you can see, going back to those 9 rows that I mentioned, you can see the funding set aside that has been identified in tiers 2, 3, and 4 for each of those. So then as we get into the projects below, all of these projects, as I said, appear in the priority project list. I believe the only potential exceptions to those would be the 2 interstate projects at the bottom, which are actually on your SIS network, the Strategic Intermodal System. And the Strategic Intermodal System actually has its own financially constrained plan and has particularly called out those projects during the years that we have specified. So that was not anyone from our side kind of contributing that. It was given to us directly. When you look through these, we do have them kind of organized in such a way that you can see the projects that are near the top are being completed soonest. So you can see, for instance, there Crawfordsville Road from LL Wallace to Wakulla Springs is the first segment that is listed there. It only has construction remaining as a phase, and it will be completed in Tier 2.
Allison, I did ask Greg about that.
Yes.
You're absolutely sure that the design has already been done on that?
that is our understanding. Does anybody else from CRTPA want to hop in?
Yeah, as I mentioned, Chairman, this morning, we're going to double check that, but the last information we have been told design is completed. But again, we are going to double check that.
Yeah, we'll double check.
Which I'm not opposed to it, but you know, this is the first time I've seen that segment ever.
Okay. Yes, we'll double check that. Thank you, Commissioner. I'll make sure to look that up. So a couple of other things just to point out here. You will notice the 2 Thomasville Road projects have an asterisk by their identification number. And those are a little bit unique in that they actually include a blend of funding partnership coming from other arterial funds and from blueprint funds. So this came conversation.
The Leon County. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I did it briefly and then I stopped. You can't.
So what I'm gonna just
I think Greg might need to mute himself or somebody.
Busted. All right. So going back to Thomasville Road, this is a partnership funding between Blueprint and the other arterial funding source. So this project is, or the 2 segments rather of Thomasville Road that are shown this way are the only 2 that do assume this blended funding. And this was a conversation that was held with Blueprint, so we feel comfortable reflecting it in that manner. While I'm talking about asterisks, I'll also call your attention to Tharp Street, which is about maybe 2/3 of the way down the list. Tharp Street has been identified as being funded entirely with Blueprint funds. And so it is noted as that, and you can see we had discussions with them about the timing and the funding levels associated with that being reflected in tiers 2 and 3. So the intent is that the design and right-of-way would be complete in tier 2 and construction would occur in tier 3. So some things to note, because I know that they were actually discussed in the PPL conversation as well. We have Orange Avenue listed here in 3 different segments. Those segments reflect the segments that were used in the PD&E, so we were trying to be as consistent as possible. I will note that they are expected to be funded entirely with state and federal funds, and that was the conversation that we had with the Blueprint to confirm the direction that we were all on the same page there. Also, we had discussed the potential split of Crawfordville Road having Lost Creek Bridge to Wakulla Erin and East Ivan to Wakulla Erin being split. The intent there was that when you look at the entire segment from East Ivan Road to Lost Creek Bridge, that is a fairly expensive project. And so when looking at that, we felt that we could advance the East Ivan to Wakulla Erin more quickly if it was segmented into 2 different components. So you will see that the East Ivan to Wakulla Erin segment does finish more quickly than does the Wakulla Erin to Lost Creek Bridge. So that's just a note there. So I won't go into, I just point out a couple other things here. We do have columns here showing the intended improvements. So you can see 2 to 4 lanes, those types of things, which indicate the actual capacity enhancements where they exist. We also have a column indicating bicycle and pedestrians, and then also the presence of a transit route along that area. So just wanted to make sure everybody was seeing that. We have a small table down at the bottom of this page that indicates unfunded needs. Now, we also have a separate table that indicates unfunded needs. I want to explain why there are 2. We wanted to show this one here because these needs that are shown here represent the only unfunded needs that were also identified in the priority project list. So in other words, you have 3 projects, US 90 at Capitol Circle, Walani at I-10, and then the Stadium Drive Lake Bradford roundabout that were identified as a part of your priority project list, but that we do not have sufficient funds to include within our cost feasible plan. Before we go to a bunch of questions, because I'm sure there will be several, I also will just mention our unfunded needs table here, which was attachment 3 in your packet, which includes similar information. This also just shows the remaining projects that were identified through our needs plan and gives you the basic information, including the provision of multimodal accommodations in each of those. So just for clarity, none of these were identified in your priority project list for CRTPA, but all of these have been identified as needs through the regional mobility plan. So with that, I'm going to pause again and see if there are questions or areas of discussion that folks have on the plan.
All right, let it listen, Kristen.
Yeah. Allison, thank you. This is a good presentation. I know we're all lamenting the fact that we're not in the same room together, because that would be easier for all of us. So doing these big presentations on Zoom, just want to appreciate all of you. So I think one of the things that strikes me when I see this list, I'll actually say the first 2 things. First is none of these projects were surprises necessarily. I think you said this early on. They've been in the pipeline for a long time. And they overlap with Blueprint and some other things. I'm not necessarily saying those projects are wrong or shouldn't be on the list, but I'm not sure when the last time we talked about Tharp Street was. I'll just put that out there. We all know it's a challenge. We all know it needs to be done, but really reflecting on how critical a need that might be and the challenges with the funding. Again, you noted that as a blueprint, but I just, it does strike me that we've been talking about the same list of projects for a long time. It is a long-range transportation list. And if anything was going to change, this would be the time to do it. Is that correct?
You got it.
We don't want to change it once it gets into the 5 or even 10 year because it's already in the pipeline. Okay. The second piece there is, I jumped in. I don't know if Commissioner Barfield's still on the list or on the call, but there are very few large road projects. I mean, there's 9 of them on the funded side. Actually, I shouldn't even say 9. I'm not counting the list. They've got numbers all different. I think you said 10 earlier, so that was in my mind. Almost all of these are in Leon, Tallahassee, few in Wakulla and Gadsden, and that is because of the type of roads that we can fund these large projects. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am, Allison, and I'll take this one. And keep in mind, these all are primarily capacity projects. In essence, there's too much traffic or projected to be too much traffic on these roadways. By and large, with the exception of Crawfordville Road, we don't really have any projects of that nature in Gadsden or Jefferson County.
Okay. I just wanted to get clarity on that because we talk about a lot of different types of projects. And if someone were to look at this list, they would think we're Leon Tallahassee focused and only big project focused. And it is so much more than that. But these are the capacity ones. Okay. So,
and if I could just point out one other thing, because I think that's a great point. One of the reasons why I think we were intentional with including the set aside time is because with some of the smaller scale projects, we do have the opportunity of being a little bit more geographically dispersed. So I think that is an excellent point, though, and perhaps we could be even more direct in addressing that opportunity in our documentation.
That would be fantastic. I think the way we have structured our priority list, how we've changed that in the last 5+ years, and y'all check me if I get this wrong, but separating out bike ped not only gave us more clarity, it wasn't all ranked and mixed together, but it also kind of opened the door for more of these opportunities, right? Okay, I'm seeing a lot of nods from all this stuff. That's good. Okay, so this is my last question here, and I hate to drag it back, but the ITS, the Intelligent Transportation Systems bucket, I keep coming back because that is new to me. That's new to all of us, as you said. And as I said in the last item, or several items ago, I understand why we advanced some funds for ITS this time. And Greg, you said you're bringing us back the plan. That is fantastic. But it stood out to me that we've got, over the life of this regional mobility plan, 45 million in intelligent transportation systems and only 15 in intersection improvements, 38 in bike ped. When our priorities historically have been on these other two categories, I was startled to see, and Greg, forgive me, I didn't ask you this in briefing because I hadn't dug down to this level yet. I was startled to see so much more in intelligent transportation systems, which we have never discussed and must have been funded through other sources before getting on this list. If I have misinterpreted this, please let me know. If I haven't, I have a really big question about why, and we've got those 3 different buckets structured the way that we have, if that is the appropriate thing for us going forward. I'm going to leave it there, but I think you probably hear that concern. We have more small projects, intersection and bike ped, and if that's how we help all of 4 of our counties, we need to really reflect on this.
Right. And this is where, or I'm sorry, do you have any more questions or do you want me to?
No, please jump in there. That's fine.
Yeah. And this is where, I caution you all not to necessarily get caught up in the numbers part of it. We made some general assumptions about these projects, but keep in mind, when you're talking about ITS, that's going to cover automated connected vehicles. There's a lot of technologies out there that we're not quite sure, where we're going to be in 5 or 10 or 15 years. We could always go back and look at those assumptions. But again, this doesn't, what we have here doesn't commit us to say we've got to spend this much on these particular buckets of projects. These are just some general assumptions that we made. Though I will say that's the one benefit of the ITS projects is you can actually get, capacity improvements on corridors like US 90 where you can't add any more lanes to it or you don't want to add any more lanes to it. But we can always come back and revisit, if you all think we need to change that funding mix, we can. But again, those were just the general assumptions that we started out with to kind of get us to this point. Yeah, we're not, that's not saying that we can only spend, $15 million on intersection improvements over the next 25 years. Again, it's establishing a baseline to at least be able to put some funding towards those types of projects.
Greg, I hear what you're saying, and I promise you, I didn't get too attached to the numbers as instructed for Crawfordville Road and below that. But for the first section, ITS, intersection improvements, and bike ped, to me, this signals where our priority is. Our priority is in intelligent transportation systems. I know that this is the new big shiny deal. I'm not even convinced it can help us with capacity. We don't know where the technology is going yet. I know we have intersection and bike ped issues right now. So the way the numbers are, it signals an intent, a priority. If I'm wrong about that, we need to articulate that. But it looks like we are more interested in intelligent transportation than the other factors.
Okay.
If these are just assumptions that we're making, you wanted to give, and then we could move the numbers later, then my next question is going to be, why can't we change the numbers now? And I will say not today. If that's possible, we could go into retreat with the plan, the ITS plan. You explain more to us. Maybe we could refine this. But I've got a big question about this. And I'm sorry, I guess I should also say a lot of this is coming from my work as your rep on the Suncoast
Sure.
Connector Task Force, the MCORS. We have had a lot of conversation about autonomous vehicles, but the connectivity, the broadband, whether or not we have access to that in our rural counties, I'm not hearing enough on that. And so this is a level playing field issue. I'm going to stop there, Mr. Chair, but Greg, I really would like to come back to this.
Okay, yeah, and I don't think it wasn't the intent to necessarily establish any priority, because one of the things is, you know, you may be able to apply some ITS technology to an intersection improvement. You know, if you've got 2 or 3 or 4 intersections in a row, we'll use Tennessee as an example. You know, we know we can't add any lanes to that. We've got problem intersections, but you may be able to apply some ITS technologies to improve capacity for certain segments of that. So these really shouldn't be seen as distinct, you know, this is strictly ITS. We can actually also apply those to intersection improvements as well. But I understand better now. You made it so clarify. Yeah, that it was not an intention to put more priority on that. We just looked at the cost of some of these projects and made some basic assumptions on that set aside. But again, it's not a true set aside that we're gonna, and I believe we used 7.5% for ITS.
You did.
We're not gonna come in and say every year we're gonna set aside this much. That was just a general, again, a general number to give us a starting point. But yeah, I think to answer your main concern, it was not our intent to show that we're putting more priority on ITS than anything else.
I think what Kristen, and I would agree with what she's saying. I mean, if it make more intuitive sense to me to have ITS and intersections flip. But that's just what I would say. And
Mr. Chair, I think we just need to refine this. I mean, I do have in my notes the slide Allison had 7.5% set aside for ITS annually and only 2.5 set aside for intersection improvements. These numbers look like hard numbers to your board.
Sure. No, I completely understand that. Yep.
And I guess there's a really big elephant in the room I don't think we're talking about, which is transit. I mean, we got a ceiling on capacity. That's pretty intelligent to look at mass transit too. So can we come back to this question with some more information? Sure. At the time when you show us the ITS plan, and will we have the opportunity to refine either the set-asides or these categories at that time?
Yes, ma'am, we could. I think it might be, and I'll have to talk to Jack and Allison, we may want to kind of to reword how we're saying that and not necessarily call it an annual set-aside, because I don't think that was really the intent. But I want to touch briefly too on the transit side. That's one of the things, you know, I kind of wish Star Metro, they're trying to get their comprehensive operations analysis started along with their transit development plan. Typically, these usually kind of go on the same timeline, and we can incorporate those projects out of those plans into the long range plan. We're just simply not going to be able to do it this time, but it had been our intent to come back when those plans are finished on the Star Metro side and possibly amend the long range plan to include some of those in here. We just weren't at a point where we could put anything in here on the transit side that had any level of specificity.
I will add.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Commissioner Dozier. I will add, though, that we are intending to reflect transit revenues within this document, because that is something we're required to do, to talk about the revenues. But as Greg said, what we'd like to do is to talk about what the planning efforts have been of the transit agencies. And so we'll still try to provide kind of the current state of the system within the document, and then make reference to the fact that planning efforts are underway to provide a latest and greatest version of their transit development plan.
I didn't mean to pile on here. I was just going to mention transit there, but thank you for that information. I don't know how long ago it was that we talked about this, but I've asked, I think others have, for an update on the transit plan. This is something we fund, but it is a City of Tallahassee plan, and yet county residents, Gadsden, McCullough, Jefferson may benefit from transit. I think it's bigger than Star Metro. So
Sure.
we need to dig into that from multiple angles. And I mean, one example, we have a public library on Pedrick that doesn't have bus access because it's on the county line on the other side of the road. We've struggled with this in past years. Public facilities should have transit access. I don't mean to digress into this, but this is the time, right? This is
Sure, no.
our regional mobility plan. So if we can come back on transit and these categories, I refine them as you will. I look forward to that next conversation.
Well, and to follow up too, Commissioner Maddox had asked us to bring back an item about regional mobility back at our February meeting, and then everything kind of went off the rails. So it's been our intention to bring that discussion back at your retreat to kind of, because we'd actually have done some work with the ARPC. They're actually managing the regional commuter services right now. So we had planned on putting together a presentation working with them. But that had gotten, like I said, we felt it'd be better off to do that as a retreat item when we have more time to talk about it. But no, I completely agree. This is the time to do it, but just we're not running concurrent with the update because Star Metro actually, I sat on their consultant selection committee, and we finished that work up about a week and a half ago. So they actually have not brought a consultant on board yet to get that started.
Greg, I also have a board meeting I have to go to in a little bit. Unless there's any objections to the actual draft connections plan, can we go ahead and get the action item out of the way and then I can be on my way?
That's entirely up to you all.
Is there any other major concerns, or is there a motion to approve the draft plan?
So move.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Any major discussion on it? Okay, any opposed? All right, we'll consider that passed. Greg, I'm going to turn it over to you because I have to go to a meeting. I think that's all the action items. Is that correct?
Let me jump back to my agenda. Yes, sir. Actually, Commissioner Matlin was our vice chair, so if he's still there,
okay,
we
perfect.
can hand the reins over to him.
Perfect. I'll see you guys next meeting.
And if okay, out of the order of operations here, just give a quick plug. You all will be receiving some information in the near future about some upcoming public engagement. This is our final engagement timeline for the plan. We have dates for some online public meetings. So we'll be sending you some more. But thanks again for letting me have the chance to present to you all.
Mr. Vice Chair.
We lose our vice chair? I don't see him.
Greg, if we don't have a vice chair, the board can designate someone else to chair the meeting to complete the meeting by our bylaws.
So any volunteers or?
Sure, I'll step up. Greg, what's the next item on the agenda?
I believe that was it. The FDOT report.
Mr. Vice Chair, Mr. Chair,
yes,
whatever your title is right now, I'm gonna need to depart as well. So we're taking care of all the action items.
Greg, is all action items completed?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much for staying this long, Commissioner Williams.
All right. Thank you all. Have a good one.
All right. FDOT report. Any representative FDOT to give that report?
Yes, this is Brian with DOT. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
The department has two items to update the CRTPA board on today. First one is the department's concluded the feasibility study on the Bluntstown Highway, Pensacola Street corridor. To no one's surprise, it did reflect the need for additional capacity along that corridor. However, it also included some interim operational improvements that we can pursue. That being said, this project corridor is currently number 8 on your project priority list. However, it is your first priority that needs a PD&E study, so it's well suited to be considered for a PD&E study in the upcoming work program cycle. The second project we wanted to update the board on is the Orange Avenue PD&E study. In efforts to keep this project on its production schedule, we're going to have an online public alternatives meeting. It's scheduled to open up for information and public comment on October 30th. The elected officials, stakeholders, agencies, and property owners will all be notified about this meeting. Again, it'll be starting on October 30th, and it'll be open for a period of 30 days for information, review, and comment. That one is currently listed as your number 5 priority in your recently adopted PPF project priority list. Again, it's well programmed. You know, it is the first project that still needs design and right-of-way funds. So it's a prime candidate to move forward again as we look at the department's tentative work program in the upcoming cycle. And with that, that concludes the department's update.
Commissioner Dozier.
Mr. Third in the row chair. Thank you for stepping up, Commissioner Maddox. Thank you for the update. Brian, were you listening to our earlier conversation when I mentioned just my concerns about the overall budget and the out years? Mostly just focused on the unknowns. And I know this is true, and I believe it's true in every FDOT district and from Central, that there's just a lot of different budget issues from the recession to other factors that could impact your work plan year in, year out. I don't know if you heard that, but if you did, I just wanted to make sure you didn't have any concerns or questions or corrections for me.
Yes, Commissioner, we're well aware. We've got a tremendous current year budget impact, which is going to trickle out through the 5 years of the department's work program and even into the 10-year Strategic Intermodal System, or SIS program. So when we present the tentative program in December, it will be a very lean program. We're going to do our best to hold what we can. However, we do anticipate having to push some product out. But, you know, the extent of which we still do not know. We've got our economists and work program staff looking at that and trying to determine exactly the revenue sources we're dealing with and what will have to be the actual impacts.
Thank you, sir. I just wanted to give you an opportunity to clarify anything if I misspoke, but it sounds like I'm hearing, you know, what you all are struggling with, and just want to appreciate the hard work of the district and Central. I know y'all are trying your best to keep things moving despite all these unknowns. Thank you.
Hey, Commissioner Dozier, I sit on the board with Kevin Tebow, and he did a presentation, and presently he says they're in excess of $1 billion in shortfalls for the DOT work program. So there's going to be a significant hit so far. They're anticipating some new revenues coming in before they make adjustments, but if they had to make the adjustments today, he said they were in excess of $1 billion in a shortfall on the work program.
Thank you, Councilwoman. I had not heard the 1 billion, but I knew it was going to be high. And obviously things could adjust depending on how quickly we come out of this recession and what happens. But we were already starting at a deficit with the need around the state. So I appreciate that. I don't want to speak out of turn, so I wanted to make sure to take this opportunity just to, you know, ensure we were on the same page. So I appreciate that and additional information. That's all. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Dozier. Any other questions? Thank you. Greg, what's the next item?
Just my report. I've got one item. We're looking at converting next month's meeting to a regular meeting. Typically, that's when we hold our retreat, but because of the virtual nature of this, I don't think we want to do a 4 or 5 hour meeting virtually, though. The members of the IA board are pretty good at that because you've done quite a few of those. But we think we've got some items that we can bring, including the Midtown area plan for approval. We can bring probably the ITS master plan as well. We look to move the retreat portion or do our retreat possibly in December. We're also looking at possibly moving the day because 3 of our members, Commissioner Dozier, Barfield, and Mr. Rito, have a conflict with the MCOR's meeting that day. So Yolanda will be reaching out to you all and your aides to see if the afternoon of, I believe, the 19th would work. With that, Mr. Chairman, I don't have anything else.
From board members. Seeing none, I entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion carries. We are adjourned. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.